Well, a very warm welcome to you. Thank you for joining me. And if you're joining me from up here in the Seattle area, yes, it's a very warm welcome this weekend. We usually get about one real hot wave per summer, and then the rest of the summer is beautiful and nice and warm. But this weekend was the hot wave. I mean, this is our 100-degree temperatures, and it looks like it's going to break tomorrow. But my goodness, this weekend was a scorcher. Anyway, was doing some weekend reading, and came up on the Yardeni website, the great Ed Yardeni, great economist, and he put up an update for the Taylor rule. So I thought I would just update y'all on the website, or excuse me, on the YouTube page. So let's kind of dive into it. Right now, it's showing that the Fed funds rate at 1.21%. That was at the beginning of the month. The actual, with the 0.75% rise in rate, I was looking this up on the New York Fed website, and the effective federal funds rate, that's a weighted average, is at 2.33%, and the Fed funds target range is at 2.25 to 2.5%. And but the most important thing is when we calculate the Taylor rule, what the Taylor rule says we should be at is at 9.63%. So depending on how closely the Fed follows the Taylor rule, we may continue to see higher rates ad infinitum until they basically break the economy. I tend to suspect there's going to be a pause after September, but we shall see. That's going to be a very interesting Fed meeting, the September meeting. Very, very interesting to see the wording on the Fed release. And I do expect the 50 basis point rise in September, but beyond that, I think there are some question marks. Anyways, Taylor rule calling for 9.63%. We're at an effective Fed funds rate of 2.33%. You can see there's a large gap. And let's move on and take a look at that large gap. And here's the Fed funds rate minus the Taylor rule. And you can see that large gap. It's pretty striking. So any way we slice it, there's going to be a convergence of these two at some point. I would suspect we're going to see the Taylor rule coming down a bit, and as the Fed funds rate goes up, or they will, I don't know if they'll totally converge together. It's a long period of Fed errors. I mean, they're really, really behind the curve, and that's the core problem, is the amount that the Federal Reserve is behind the curve right now, and they are being forced to tighten. You know, whether we politically want to call it a recession or not, it's 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth, and the Fed is just tightened into that, and they are going to tighten again in September. So this really shows how far behind the curve the Fed has been, and it really shows also how poor, and this is not a Fed criticism, this is a federal government criticism really, of fiscal criticism of the handling of the COVID crisis. A lot of this recession comes from our handling of COVID and the draconian measures allowing healthcare workers and healthcare leaders to dictate economic policy. They were really, really bad policies that were enacted during COVID, and hopefully they won't be repeated again in our lifetime. Anyway, let's move on. You can see here we've got, I'm going to move through this chart pretty quick. Real and actual GDP, real actual and potential GDP. Move on to the next chart. And we'll take a look at the output gap. The output gap is turning down, so that's not a good sign. It's it's not a startling turn down at this point, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on. Let's move to the next slide, because there potential real GDP. Tell you what, one thing that's a concern is that there's really, in this potential GDP number, this comes from the CBO, it's just blah growth in the U.S. I mean, it's very low growth for a long period of time. So looking forward, so I would say that's an issue. Anyway, let's move on to the next chart. This is, let's see, real versus actual potential GDP. Basically, mashing together of the last couple of charts we've been looking at. And we're basically at a convergence place with real GDP and real potential output. Let's move to the next chart. And this is the chart I was looking for. Here we go. And here's the concern I've got is the resource utilization rate. It's peaking, and it looks like it has peaked. If you look at the blue line here, the output gap is turned down. But what's really concerning, this is just me talking, but that we are at some sort of a peak, it looks like, at resource utilization rates. And we have room to come down quite a bit. It's the type of ceiling, if you will, that you normally see at the beginning of recessions. And, whether Q3 through September shows positive or negative growth, I've got my suspicions that there's going to be some positive growth in Q3 and maybe some sort of adjustment to Q2 to get that into like plus 0.2%, plus 0.1%, then kind of politically pretend it wasn't a recession. I suspect they're going to do that. The mechanism would be the chief suspect in my mind would be they tinker with the inflation numbers. Because if you look at the non-inflationary numbers, we were still growing as an economy. The problem was we weren't growing as fast as inflation. It was a problem. And anyway, from a political standpoint, if I were king of the world, that's what I would do. I would tinker with the inflation numbers. Nobody knows the difference. And then voila, you've got 0.1% growth, no recession. Or 0.2% growth, no recession. And nobody knows any different. Anyway, that's about it. I appreciate you sticking with me. Well, no, I guess we do have one more chart. Here we go. And this is basically resource utilization rate components. We take a look at the employment rate. And again, the capacity basically is showing the same thing. The problem is in the red line, the capacity utilization is bumping up against historically the ceiling that you get before a recession. And I know that it was higher in the past. If you look at past numbers, the ceiling was higher, but our average growth rate has come down. So the ceiling on capacity utilization has also come down. So that's basically where I think we've got a problem. And the real problems are going to come after the September quarter is over with. If they can generate a little bit of positive growth going into the midterms, I think they probably will do that. They'll give it all she's got. But I do think from an economic standpoint, the problem is going to be from the end of September, October, November, December, January, February. That is going to be a real troublesome period. And the reason I say that is that you are seeing a real slowdown in construction spend, or a real slowdown in real estate, which is going to lead to a real slowdown in construction spending. And I think that's going to be a problem. That's the next shoe to drop. So we'll keep an eye on that. I could be dead wrong. Who knows? I'm just an idiot from Seattle, but I do think that is probably where things are going to manifest themselves. And anyway, we'll see. I appreciate your sticking around. I will sign off. I've said enough. Have a great day, great weekend. We'll catch up with you tomorrow.